June, as many of you know, is Pride Month. The month is significant because in June of 1969, police in New York City raided the Stonewall Inn, a popular gay bar in Greenwich Village. In that moment, a series of spontaneous protests sparked the modern gay rights movement, anchored in visibility and empowerment. But change came slowly. For example, up until 2003 in the U.S., intimacy between same-sex couples was still illegal in many states. The Supreme Court decision in Lawrence versus Texas struck down all sodomy laws.
Today was a victory for love!
That decision cleared the way for same-sex marriage to become legal in 2015. But there's still a lot of work to be done, not just here, but globally. Today, in nearly 60 countries, homosexuality is against the law with punishment as severe as the death penalty. For all of our guests today, it is not lost on us that not too long ago in America, coming on the show as openly gay could have gotten them arrested. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Great Day Houston. I'm Deborah Duncan.
And I'm Carlos Hernandez.
You just saw a brief overview of how the modern-day Pride movement started in America. It was a spark that mobilized communities across the country.
But long before the Stonewall Uprising in June of 1969, Houston's gay community was already at work. The challenge in the beginning was to enjoy life authentically, but not so much in public.
Instead, trailblazers carved out safe spaces, notably in the neighborhood known as Montrose, where we are today. We're inside Postino Wine Cafe. It's a space that once housed Houston's oldest gay bar, the Montrose Mining Company. It served the community for 38 years.
Yeah, and if you look around, you can still find pieces of the history inside of the restaurant.
But Montrose started as a wealthy Houston suburb with stringent neighborhood restrictions. Rice University professor and one-time resident Dr. Brian Riedel shares how it became the community it is today.
I'm trained as an anthropologist. I did most of my work in Athens, Greece, with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans activists, thinking with them about how they did their work, how they did their outreach, and what it meant for them to do that in Greece versus somewhere else.
You study that throughout your societies over the, I was going to say decades, but centuries.
And more recently, here in Houston and its history.
Montrose is a part of town that people will say that's the gay part of town.
Mm-hmm.
How did it get there? We'll talk about that in a second, but how it started out, it actually was a suburb, when it's only about 3 miles from downtown, but it was one of the streetcar suburbs.
Yeah. When Montrose was platted and added to the city plan in 1911, it was straddling the edge of the city limits, right? So there were streetcar lines that came here. It was designed to be a place for the elite to have their homes outside of the dusty urban core. It was also designed as a white-only neighborhood.
Yeah, because that was happening at the time.
This is Jim Crow.
Yeah. It was almost like another River Oaks, if you will.
It was the antecedent to River Oaks. When River Oaks came along in 26, a lot of people who had property in Montrose lifted up and moved over there.
We are famous in Houston for knocking down a lot of buildings. Fortunately, some of them still remain. One of those in Montrose was the Link Lee Mansion.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was the calling card, really, that the developers wanted potential buyers to see for what this neighborhood could mean for them. When that building was finished in 1912, it was the most expensive private residence in Houston. And so today, it's now part of the University of St. Thomas. It's where their administration building is. But at the time, it was really the calling card for the neighborhood and how people wanted to imagine what it might be like to live there.
And then there was La Colombe d'Or, which is still standing as well.
Yeah, that was the Fondren family mansion. And it's actually one of the latest mansions to get added. It was finished in 1923. And so that kind of 10-year space, really you can see a lot of what was happening in Montrose between those two buildings. They are rich, multi-story, they have great entertaining spaces, but also they were designed, and the people who lived in them, the Fondren family, got their money from starting Humble Oil Company, which you may remember turned into Exxon.
So a lot of wealth here, but then demographics started to change, as they do in most neighborhoods, especially the earlier neighborhoods. How did that demographic shift?
So part of what happened across the nation were these two key moments. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled that you couldn't use a courtroom to enforce a racially restricted deed covenant. And so all sorts of neighborhoods started rearranging after that particular ruling. And then a few decades later, the Fair Housing Act made such covenants impossible to put in place at all. Those 2 decades were really the transition for Montrose to move from this white-only kind of space into a much more multi-ethnic, multicultural space. Some of the evidence for this comes from the Neartown Association. In the late 60s, they put together this really cool brochure where they were advertising the new Montrose, and it's a great place for young families to move, and some of the old families are still here too. But it was also, and they say this, home to long hairs and college students and Mexicans and African Americans and homosexual.
And with that said, during the times, there were still issues with being very open about being gay, because at one point it was just illegal, right?
For sure.
But there were some trailblazers and businesses that were set up to foster that community.
One of the first places that people think about when they tell stories about how Montrose used to be is the restaurant Art Wren's. If you go to Katz's Deli today on Westheimer, you're walking into the building that used to be Art Wren's. And that was a place where after the bars in Midtown closed, people could drive and walk there because it was a late night restaurant, one of the few that was around at the time. And so people started to learn about the neighborhood by coming to Art Wren's. After a little while, in the 60s, bars started opening in Montrose too.
There was Blacksmith.
Blacksmith is a current coffee shop that used to be called Mary's. Yeah, Mary's Naturally is the full name of it. It used to be a pharmacy, and then in the 70s, Joe Anthony ended up picking it up and turning it into a bar. Fannie Farmer picked it up after him. And what both Joe and Fannie understood is that a bar is not just a business, it's a community hub. And so they spent a lot of time supporting the community that supported them. It turns out that a lot of the organizations that we have today can trace their lineage back to original funding from Mary's. So the symphonic band, the Pride Band, used to be funded by Mary's, for example. And a lot of our community response to HIV and AIDS started in that bar.
Yeah, and we have today still a lot of bars that will cater to the LGBTQ plus and the ally community.
Absolutely, but actually we have fewer of those bars now than we did at the time of Stonewall.
Sign of the times, right?
Sign of the times indeed, yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, people still refer to Montrose as the gay neighborhood, but that's probably becoming less and less too because of feeling more comfortable living in so many other places and other options too, obviously.
Yeah, it's true. And if you talk to people who've lived in Montrose for a long time, but then kind of sort them out by decades, they each are nostalgic for the Montrose that the people after them never knew, right? So when I got here, people were like, oh, you never knew it. And now I've turned into one of those people who says to people just arriving to Houston, oh, you didn't know, right? It's different now.
So Montrose became kind of this mecca for the LGBTQ plus community because they knew there were places that really would cater to who they were and not care who they were all at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for going through the neighborhood of Montrose, which if you have not been down here, it has a lot of nostalgia. It's very colorful. It's very welcoming. It's just kind of a cool spot to hang in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. To learn more about Montrose and Houston's LGBTQ history, you can visit the Banner Project and J.D. Doyle Archives. We'll have links on greatdayhouston.com. We would also like to give a special thanks to the organizations listed for their help in providing Great Day Houston with photos seen in this story.